But really, open source, as it is now, is much more than just the license itself. Sure, that's a very, very important part. It's a key part of what open source is. But the thing that really makes open source thrive, the thing that makes open source successful, are the certain methodologies associated with how you create open source. It's more than just the license itself. And we'll talk about how the ASF does that real quick. Okay? So, that's just another synopsis of that. I do want to spend a little bit of time because there was a couple questions on both Zonker and Worley's thing about licenses and stuff like that. There are a number of different kinds of licenses out there. If you want to, you can kind of narrow them down to a basic 3. There's basically the give me credit, which is basically says you can do anything you want to do with it, but you just can't claim that it's yours. Make sure that people know that I wrote it. The other is the give me fixes. You can use it, basically almost do anything you want to do with it. But if you fix that code that I gave you, please send me the fixes back so I can add it to my distribution. And the other is, and I'm sure I'm going to be pummeled by that classification, is the give me everything kind of stuff, which is the biggest, the most known open source license would be the GPL. And we'll talk about a little bit what all these mean. The Apache license is very, very liberal, very, very permissive. It has this classification of being business friendly, and it basically just means that you can take an Apache license software code base, and if you want to fork it off and relicense it under different licenses, even closed source licenses and stuff like that. It's very, very flexible, very, very unrestrictive. The Give Me Fixes license are like the LGPL, Mozilla, the Eclipse, licenses as well, and it does protect the code. It doesn't provide this condition on the derivative works associated with those codes, and so it's still considered somewhat very, very business friendly. Now, I do want to say that I'm not a lawyer, so these are just rough approximations of what the actual license is, but these are kind of like the main ideas behind it. Now, GPL, or the copyleft license, is a little bit more viral. There, I've said it. A little bit more viral in nature, and which basically means that in a lot of ways, any software which makes any sort of significant use of this code that's under a GPL license must itself be under a GPL, GPL kind of code. If you release and distribute this code, it also has to be under GPL, no matter where it came from or stuff like that. So it's basically, as I said before, it's only when you distribute the code, and it also really only applies to derivative works. And the main difference between all of these is where you see the freedom, where you want to provide the most freedom. Do you want to provide it more to the user, so the user has more freedom to do what they want to do with it? Or do you want to provide more freedom to the software, so the freedom itself, so the software itself is always free? And I will state there is no thing as one true license. Okay, I'm a pragmatic. I mean, there are valid reasons for every one of these licenses out there. However, I will admit that in most cases, and certainly it's the mindset of the ASF, that a less restrictive, a more permissive license, such as the Apache license, is much more well suited to universal adoption of the code. If your intent is to get that code out to as many people, as many users, as many developers as possible, then Apache type license is really the way to go. If you're implementing open standards or open protocols, again, an Apache type license most probably is the way to go as well. So let's talk real quick about how Apache views open source, okay? Sometimes you'll hear it called the Apache way. It's kind of deprecated. We don't kind of use it anymore. But basically it means these are the basic memes, the basic ideas, methodologies that the ASF uses. Now, one of the reasons people would ask is why focus on the ASF? What makes the ASF kind of special? What's great about the way they view open source? A lot of people do open source out there. What's great about the ASF? Well, Simon Phipps, WebInc, I don't know how many people follow him, but he's got this survey going on, Open by Rule, which basically, goes through and looks at different open source communities out there and tries to figure out how open, by his definition of open, how open they are. Apache is the only one that's got a perfect 10 out of 10. His scale goes from -10 to 10. So at least as far as, Simon is concerned, if you need to look at sort of like, the best, most open by rule, open by consensus, open by community form of doing open source, the way the ASF does it is great. So the basic things that we're looking at, and we're going to go into some detail about all of these, is the whole idea of meritocracy, peer-based, and stuff like that. So let's dive on in. Meritocracy is the idea that you're governed by merit. The more you do, the more you're allowed to do. If you've proven yourself able to consistently provide patches, then we're going to let you do that without having to get permission for us. If you've proven yourself enough that you're good enough to be able to physically touch the code, then we're going to allow you to do that. Okay? Merit is based on what you do, not who you are, not where you came from, not who your employer is or anything like that. And merit never expires, and we'll talk about why about that that way. It's also very, very important to remember that we're all peer-based. Again, I mentioned that we're all very, very focused on individuals. So what's important for that to work is the whole idea about being peer-based. People are valued and trusted. You may disagree with what they say, but you agree that they're not stupider than you are, they're not more intelligent than you are. You're peers basically forever. All votes hold the same weight. And this goes against some of the open source communities which have this benevolent dictator for life. Someone who has ultimate authority to basically overrule the demands or the requirements for everyone out there. And of course, we don't have that. Everyone's votes are the exact same. The idea behind it is that we want to create code by creating community. So why is that? Why is community so important to the ASF? Well, first of all, we're all volunteers. We're doing this because we want to do it, whether we're paid for it or not. And because, everyone who is a volunteer knows your time, your availability ebbs and flows. Sometimes you got plenty of cycles to do work, sometimes you don't. So you want to be able to accommodate that. A healthy community is one that always grows, always, bringing in new blood and making them feel warmed and welcome and stuff like that. And poisonous people, poisonous communities basically strangle that active development, the healthiness of it. So the end result is when you have a healthy community, you have a healthy environment to create really, really fantastic code. Now, we have a lot of ways of making sure that we're ensuring consensus among those. We have this voting system that we talk about, and in a lot of ways, and especially depending on what cycles you go through, if somebody agrees with you, if they say +1, it means someone, it means, yeah, I agree with you, that makes sense. That's sort of like a signal that, they've done work in open source, mostly within the ASF and stuff like that. Now, we do have an idea of veto, which is basically someone that says, you know what, this isn't a good idea, we should not commit this code, okay? It cannot be based on personal reasons. It's got to be based on valid technical reasons. And if you can prove it's a valid technical reason, then it cannot be overruled. And this is sort of like the limiting choke factor on that. It's not similar to the dictator thing, but it just provides a way to make sure that every person's opinion is counted and valued. I won't go into a lot about the commit process itself because it's really about code development, but you'll see that at least what's important in all of these things is that before code is ever in a releasable branch, before code ever gets out to the end user, there is always at least 3 developers who have looked at the code, vetted the code, and said, yeah, I've tested it, it looks great, ship it out. Okay, so the idea that there's a quick path around code getting out there, which is intrusive or something like that, doesn't happen. And so we have a couple release processes associated with that. And this also, the collaborative development assures that as well. If you have an idea but you can't get enough support behind it, okay, you can't force it through unless you have at least 2 other people who agree with your idea as well. One of the things that's also very, very important to the ASF, because we are a virtual organization all over the place, people in different time zones and stuff like that, Mailing lists, the use of mailing lists are our preferred method to do all development, okay? It's archived, so if you've been away from the project for 6 months, you want to come back and see what's been going on, it's very easy to look at the archives. They're all publicly available. We're not doing anything in secret. They're asynchronous. So you don't have to be on IRC at that particular time to have some sort of input in the direction that the project is going on. It provides that latency to make sure that every voice is heard. And as I said before, it is available to everyone. It's a public list. So if there's a project you're thinking about getting into, the easiest way to do that is get into the mailing list, find out what's going on, and then make that easy of transition inside there. Other methods of communications like wikis and IRCs and even face-to-face contacts are okay as long as they're not the main development mechanism, okay? We have a saying that it should be on the, well, maybe I thought it was on this slide, but if it didn't happen on the list, it didn't happen, okay? This is very, very important when you want to build consensus in wide-ranging, large communities, is making sure that no one feels disenfranchised by being in the wrong location, having a job or whatever. So making it easier for people to get up to speed and stuff like that is very, very important. Okay, and of course there's a responsible oversight associated with the way ASF does stuff. License compliant, we're tracking the IP. If people are touching the code, we make sure they have contributor license agreements, on file, which is basically saying that, yep, this is code that I'm, legally allowed to donate to us. Now, some of this stuff really, depending on what background you come from, is not really different from what you think about the scientific community, which is all about peer review. Okay, it's about creating ideas and theories, writing them down in a public forum, inviting your peers to basically rip you to shreds with the idea that now you've got, an idea, a theory, which is now very, very important, very, very crucial, and that other people can build upon. Okay, think how backwards we would be if the scientific community was built and constructed in the same way that commercial proprietary software was developed. No one would be able to build on the achievements, the enhancements and stuff like that other coders and developers have effect. And this is really one of the main reasons why open source, at least in my opinion, has really grown, is that it enables this proven method to now be used in software development. And so, again, showing that it works in software development means that it can also work in other areas as well. And also in there's this idea of publish or perish in the scientific community. Well, in the open source realm, it's called release early and often. And you can kind of use that as sort of like the health measurement of a software project. If a project does lots of releases, and chances are very, very good that it's a healthy project. Of course, that doesn't mean that's always the case. They could just be sending out crap code, and every release is just another bug fix upon a bug fix. But usually that's the case. I won't go into a lot of other details right here because I know I'm really, really running late. I was hoping to have some time for any kind of Q&A. But basically, some concluding thoughts on this: trust your developers and your users. Okay, create a very, very tight feedback loop. One of the nice things about open source is that for the most part, developers are users. Users are developers. So the tighter that feedback loop can be, the better it's going to be. Also, communication is key. Making it as open as possible, being as encouraging as possible. The lowest common denominator for everyone is very, very important. Open source is not the good housekeeping seal of approval. There is a ton of crap open source code out there. Don't just assume that because something's out with an open source license that I can take it, okay? Okay? So really, I mean, if you're considering using open source, do what you would normally do when you're purchasing any software project, open software code base, whether it's proprietary or not. Look at it, investigate it, do some looking at it. The very fact that it's open source means that you can do a lot more. You can see exactly how the development cycle was, something you can't do maybe in commercial and proprietary softwares out there, okay? Basically that is it. And final thoughts are Make it easier for developers to join, and of course, give them a reason to. Developers love scratching their own itch. Give them a back scratcher. That's it. Thank you. Sorry.